I saw a really good quote, which was, people like great content, and sometimes great content is an ad. And I think it's 100% true. You know, the best ads we see out there, you don't understand or perhaps appreciate that it is an advert, but you're inspired to purchase.
Welcome to Connected Thinking, our series of chats with standout voices from the world of marketing, where we unpack what's trending, what's shifting, and what's coming next. I'm Noon, your host and Senior Social Media Manager at Scene Connects. Today I'm joined by Nicole Pilkington, the Global Head of eCommerce at Barilla Group, where she leads digital strategy across 15 markets, driving online growth, shopper experience, and performance across global retail platforms. She's played a key role in scaling Barilla's digital ecosystems, connecting brand, media, and commercial teams to unlock e-commerce growth worldwide. So welcome, Nicole. This feels like a full circle moment because we obviously used to work together at Barilla and we've known each other now for almost 5 years.
Yeah.
And yeah, it just feels great to have you here on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm really excited, and to do it with you is a real special moment for me.
So tell me a little bit more about you.
Yeah, okay. So I've always worked in e-commerce. I find it really interesting because no 2 days are ever the same and the goalposts continually change. And I really like to think that I challenge myself, and e-commerce feels like a really good fit for me because I'm on that continuous learning path, figuring it out together. And there's a real community there, even within an organization, but also outside of an organization. I think it gives you a really nice opportunity to, build a community around a common objective. I'm currently at Barilla Group, as you mentioned, within the global team. But before that, I worked at Johnson & Johnson in their local and regional e-commerce teams.
Amazing. I also feel like there's a really big opportunity. I know especially what you've done at Barilla in like upskilling, I think a lot of markets as well in terms of how they use e-commerce. And there's a lot of like growth and education that can be done there too.
Yeah, I think being in a global role is a real privilege because you get to upskill individuals around the world and really be part of their growth journey. So as much as my role is growing the eComm business at Barilla, I take a real deep interest in growing the local teams around me.
For a long time, e-commerce and FMCG was treated just as a sales channel. Are we now seeing a shift towards it becoming more of a strategic growth engine for brands?
100%. I think the best example I have of this is if I look at my 2025 results for one of my top 3 markets, 73% of the company growth came from e-commerce last year. So where previously I think e-commerce, it was growing and it was a channel where it was kind of interesting, but it was like the little baby sister to your traditional, perhaps in-store discount retail channels. It's now kind of, if you want to grow as a business and as an organization, eComm needs to be kind of one of your key retail channels. And it needs to have kind of, I would say, a considered approach around where you spend your time and investment. I think e-commerce is a really interesting place to be because there's always 100 things that you can be doing. But really you need to try and figure out, what's the 2 to 5 things that are going to make a difference and how do you go after those? So I think outside of the results I saw last year, again, if I look at industry forecasts or industry trends, they're kind of reporting, 50%, 60% of growth in the next coming 3 years are going to come from e-commerce. So I think as brands, we just really need to think about what role does that play for us and how do we get there?
Definitely. I also feel like there's a big opportunity. As you said, you should focus on like the 2 to 5 things rather than maybe getting ahead of where your brand is at and thinking, okay, how can we do this really big shiny thing that other brands might be doing? And let's just think if we're doing like the more simple things best and then go from there and scale from there.
Yeah.
What does the evolution actually look like, do you think, in practice?
Yeah, so I think in practice, you touched on it there, talking about going after the things that matter. I think it's having a real clear approach, but also keep it simple. So to your point, you can kind of look externally, and we should look externally for inspiration. But often, that can mean we get a bit carried away and we think about, oh, well, this looks really good and this looks really interesting. And I've seen a really good case study. But where I found success in e-commerce roles particularly is having a real kind of simple strategy of, 1 to 2 pages of what are we actually trying to achieve and how do we kind of, relate everything we do back to that kind of overall simple approach.
Social platforms are increasingly shaping product discovery before shoppers ever land on a retailer's site. How can FMCG brands better connect their creator storytelling with e-commerce conversion?
There's a huge opportunity. I think, again, I saw a statistic the other day that 60% of users on TikTok now are discovering new brands or new products through the platform, even though they're not in that product discovery or product research phase. So one, the opportunity is 100% there. I think to your point around how can brands perhaps capitalize upon that or really take their fair share, I think it really comes down to thinking about the product and the category you sit in. I don't doubt that in the future, if I think about storytelling or creators or social commerce, that it suits and the nature of it will fit all categories. But today, for example, I work on pasta, bakery and condiments products. I'm part of a weekly shop. I'm 60 to 80 items in a basket. I'm pretty mundane. No one really likes shopping for groceries. So people try to do it as quickly as possible. That kind of, if I think about creator storytelling, there's a role they play in inspiring, getting the brands at the forefront of people's minds, but it doesn't necessarily always result in a purchase there and then. And I think there's that distinction between, I completely admire all the beauty brands out there who, they're able to use storytellers and content creators to talk through the benefits of their products. And then due to the nature of the products they sell at the price point and the target market they're going after, they can often convert instantly. I think we've all probably had an Amazon shop where we've instantly had a moisturizer delivered or a mascara. I don't think it's quite the same for grocery products. And like I said, I'm not denying that we might not get there in the future. I really hope we do. But today, again, I think it's thinking about what's the role these storytellers and content creators can play, and what does that mean in the total, looking at it from a total perspective. So for me, if I'm thinking in an idealistic world, it would be Noon or Nicole cooking up their latest pasta recipe and talking about the benefits, the taste, why to their followers it might be really interesting. And then, it would be me working in an eComm role, making sure when anyone lands on a grocery website, my products are there, the brand is shown in a way that conveys the same message. And also, we're at the forefront of that search algorithm. And, that's kind of what we think about as retail media. But often there's a missing connection, I would say, between retail media and social or content creators. And again, I think I saw a really good, I talk about this a few times, but I saw a really good quote, which was, people like great content and sometimes great content is an ad. And I think it's 100% true. The best ads we see out there, you don't understand or perhaps appreciate that it is an advert, but you're inspired to purchase. And I think as a brand, it's just thinking about where is the moment where it makes sense for that journey to lead to a purchase, and where perhaps can you connect the dots later down in the journey.
Really good response. I feel like you touched on a lot of really interesting points as well, because like you said, it's usually a case of it's a weekly purchase. It's maybe a smaller price point as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one where you might buy it once and then next week you're like, actually, I want to purchase something differently. So how are we making sure that from a social perspective and a creative perspective, we're building these connections with people so that it becomes something where they're like, you know what, I cannot go this weekly shop without my Barilla pasta kind of thing. So I think that's a great point. And also, like you mentioned as well, there is a bit of a disconnect between like social teams and e-commerce teams. And I know it's something we've worked on together in the past, but the way that consumers will kind of consume that content, it's not disconnected. So it is a case of, if I see a video, am I going to have a link, or is there going to be like an add-on on TikTok for a paid ad where it allows me to click through and straight away buy that product? And we need to make sure, I'd say, especially in like the FMCG spaces and the businesses, that is connected, because by making that kind of user experience a lot easier, you ultimately will be able to hopefully get a purchase.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes we can add an add to buy button, so we feel like, oh, we can do it, so we may as well. But I think it's really thinking about the shopper and what do they want in that moment. And to your point, it's all building towards the same thing, but we need to have that kind of shared vision and objective to understand what are we actually going after.
There's quite an important piece between e-commerce teams and social teams working together. And I know that's something that we worked on quite closely at Barilla to make sure that we're not working in silos and our teams are collaborating really well. So what do you think is, one, like an advantage and good results that can be driven by that, but also maybe like what not to do when you're trying to build that?
Well, I mean, together we worked really hard to overcome this, but I would say they separated us. And that you mentioned there when you were talking silos. And I think in separating us, well, they didn't separate us, just for context, we started in different teams and they were never joined together. But I think, that in itself created a silo, right? We had different reporting lines, we had different leaders who ultimately had different objectives. In previous roles, I've worked in a digital marketing function where e-commerce sat next to social, and we sat next to data, and it was kind of one hub where actually, in my regular team meeting, I wasn't just discussing e-commerce, I was understanding what was happening on social, and we had one leader who was really brought us all together. For me, silos come out of structure. And so the way an organization is created, I think that, in itself, everyone's trying to achieve what they can within their role. And even up to a leadership perspective, we have different objectives at kind of year end or start of the year. And I don't necessarily see that social and e-commerce are, I think ultimately we're trying to aim towards doing the same thing. But if you were to look at those two objectives side by side, I would think they'd be quite different. And so I think it takes people like ourselves to, create those conversations, take an interest, and kind of take a step back, I would say, out of your specific role and specific deliverables to really think about, I'm gonna see what Noon's up to this week. I remember going behind your desk and always seeing different content being created. You'd be perhaps looking at our Instagram or our TikTok accounts. And for me, that's a million miles away from selling products on a retailer website. But we're ultimately trying to do the same thing. We're trying to create a competitive advantage for the brands we work for, and really make that part of the purchase set. So, yeah, I think silos are created by structure, I would say. I think in kind of raising your head a little above where you're at today and what your specific role looks like, and building those connections, that's been really invaluable for me.
It's really important to do as well, because I think on your point too, it's easy where your day-to-day is, this is your team, this is your structure, these are objectives. But I remember in my first ever job, there was a senior leadership person that always used to say, everything that's happening is outside of these glass windows. Like day to day, you're just so looped into our team, what's important, our objectives, like how am I going to finish the day, how are we going to finish the year? But ultimately what's important is outside of our walls, and we have to always make sure that we're thinking about that. And the way that a consumer sees Barilla or sees your brand isn't, this is the social team, this is the e-commerce team. It's, what is my journey? Is this easy? Do I feel connected? Can I purchase? That's a really good point. And what would you say not to do?
Allow yourself to not interact with the different stakeholders that you work with, not think about the people outside of the windows, and really just, I would say, be quite close-minded on what you're trying to achieve. I think the best results come from that collaboration, from, I would say, being curious, but also being a little raw in kind of, I definitely don't know as much about social as you. So can you help me kind of understand? Can you talk me through what you're trying to achieve? Because even if I have a conscious bias of, okay, well, social's just for awareness, how do I kind of ask myself the questions to question those thoughts and beliefs, to not only expand my knowledge set, but also to your point, kind of further develop what we're doing here as a brand through that genuine curiosity. So I guess what not to do for me would be to not be curious, and to not kind of think about the possibilities of just opening up that headspace a little.
So Nicole, you lead e-commerce strategy across multiple markets. How do you balance that global consistency in brand voice with their local expertise?
Looking globally for any brand, I think there's always commonalities that we can draw. And for me, in an e-com role, that's the way people shop online. It's kind of, I would say, very stereotypical across lots of different countries. But I think thinking about the brand voice is a really interesting perspective. And it's something I would say at Barilla we're actively working on. I think, we've recently moved into a global category organization, which is really interesting for us. So, of course, now having this global category matrix, it enables us to have for the different global brands we own, playbooks, thoughts, approaches, one message, one voice, one brand. But working in a retail facing channel, that can be quite challenging because yes, the messages we want to deliver are the same, but actually the message that's going to convert a shopper in store or online is sometimes quite different to the broader brand messaging. And I think we really need to think about, how do we draw synergies? So is it with the visuals we use? Is it perhaps with the claims or the wording or the brand voice? The approach I have globally is that it's very much led by the local markets. So I like to use an analogy of being in a global team, whether it's global category or global e-commerce. If you think about a tennis player, the tennis player's on the pitch, but actually they have a nutritionist, they have a coach, they have lots of different functions supporting them. And I think as global, your role is to be those support functions to make that tennis player perform as best as they can on the day. And the tennis player can be a local eComm manager, it can be a local digital marketeer, it can be a local marketing person. But, we're really there as the behind the scenes support functions. So I think balancing the brand voice is really interesting. We do, of course, want that consistency and you want to feel like you experience the same Barilla brand everywhere. I think that's ultimately, one of our key goals. But in practice, it doesn't always work that way. And I think having that kind of flexibility, but also understanding that the local teams, they understand the shopper and the market way more than we ever will at a global level. So I think, again, it's kind of taken a very tight, locally coordinated approach. Within e-commerce specifically, that's supported by 5 key roles within a global kind of center of excellence. But again, my role is to listen and learn and provide the guidance, but also kind of appreciate where the global tone of voice or global approach might not necessarily translate the way we want it to into retail, and really think about those nuances.
It's such a delicate balance as well, I feel like, because now thinking back to when I would be working on, let's say, campaigns, it's very much we've got our brand voice, we've got our campaign, and then you almost like then work with the markets to just localize that. But that in itself is a delicate balance. And then now the layer that you're adding of then there's the retailer layer of, okay, we've kind of customized this and localized it, but how are we making sure it's relevant to the retail shopper? Because it's a completely different kind of messaging and approach. So I think your direction of, you need to make sure that you're listening to the experts of that space and then kind of customizing and adjusting as you see fit.
Yeah, and I think one thing we've discussed together before is it's the same shopper, right? So I know we talk about the retail shopper, but it's the same shopper, but their mindset is fundamentally quite different. When we're sat at home, whether we're watching TV, we're browsing social, we're browsing the internet, the mindset we're in is very different to being in a retail store or purchasing our products on a mobile phone or on a website. And so that's the difference we need to think about. Yes, we're all going after the same cohort and the same shoppers, but actually the mindset is fundamentally quite different. And we need to make sure as a brand we're meeting that and we're meeting the shopper where they are, as opposed to, we've got this one message, we should put that everywhere and then it's the same experience. Actually, the shopper might need a nudge in a different direction in order to result in that purchase.
Yeah, and I think it's a big reason why we work really well together. I would say it's because, like you said, it's very easy for, let's say from an e-commerce perspective, to be like, these are our targets, this is what we have to hit. From a social perspective, these are the KPIs, this is what we need to make sure that we're achieving. But if you think about, again, how like a human being is going to purchase your products. There is kind of like a mental load that you want to be lifted. There is an emotional connection or a feeling that I want people to feel when they see our content. And on your your shopping kind of point of view as well, like I know that if a brand makes it easy for me I see something, it isn't then bombarding me with messaging, and then it's just really easy to, even the Apple Pay feature at the end when I'm trying to finish and close my purchase, then I'm like, oh, I'm definitely gonna do that again. But if it's difficult, like 8 times out of 10, I'm just gonna just close that tab and be like, I can't do this right now. You know, it's too difficult of like a process. So I think that is something that's really important for businesses to think about, how, again, they're kind of seeing their teams and their sections bigger than just what's inside your office, and how are you thinking about how genuine people, which are buying your products, are going to consume your content, purchase your content, and take anything that you're kind of giving to them in. And your point on the teams too, I think, is a good point around making sure that you have that kind of connection, collaboration, and curiosity. But what I wanted to ask was, how do you think you can build that in teams that are more global, or maybe completely remote, or in the office like once a month? Because obviously there's this whole question around, well, if you're not physically together, how are you making sure that you are working together collaboratively from more of like a remote perspective?
Leadership play a really big role in this, I would say. So again, if you're leading a function, I think you're setting the example. If I think about the way I behaved in early roles, I was completely looking at the person above me and just reflecting their behaviors because I thought that was what was correct. And of course, as you grow and develop in roles, you begin to find your own style. But anyone in a leadership role needs to be taken omni-channel. How do I be connected with lots of different functions? And, I touched upon this point of earlier within my career, I sat within an eComm team, but I was also sat with the social, with the digital marketeers, and just hearing what we're up to is really interesting. And so I think it's building time for those connections. I know everyone thinks of themselves as time poor, but on a Friday morning, a 30-minute coffee where different teams join and you're speaking through kind of what's new within your world. If you're already connected, that can be really seamless. And I think, 30 minutes, it might be once a week, it might be once a fortnight. It doesn't have to be, I would say, on a specific cadence, but creating those moments where in the office, I mean, you and I would stand by the coffee machine and catch up and understand what each other were working on quite regularly when we were at Barilla. So we need to make time to create those moments. And I think working remotely, you fall into that trap of, I only need to have a meeting in my diary if it's going to deliver a really specific purpose. And we get kind of trapped within back-to-back meetings. But if we're in the office, we're taking time to walk past someone's desk, to be at the coffee machine. So for me, it's really creating those moments in a virtual world to be connected. But again, also I think leadership need to set that example and almost kind of, I would say, encourage that knowledge sharing across departments and creating those connections beyond the people that you need to work with to be the people that are going to complement and help you.
And I feel like that's particularly important when you're doing a global and a local role as well, or working global and local teams, because I know like we definitely did this where we would have all of our global meetings and our agency meetings, etc. But then what will happen is you then have the local teams probably all doing similar things that we can all learn from each other and work together on. But then by putting in, let's say, like you said, that doesn't need to be like a particular cadence, but a forum where you're able to come together and knowledge share and just kind of share winnings and things that you need like support on, you're working on, you then just create much more of like a uniform business, let's say. And it then just means that everyone's working more collaboratively. And then back to your point previously, where it then allows you to be more curious. It allows you to make sure that your social, paid, digital commerce are all connected, because you are asking questions of like, oh, wait, hang on. So that content that we've shown on social, how can we maybe use it on e-commerce? Or how can we make sure we're working together in the best ways possible?
Just to add as well, we host an annual like eComm. Well, I call it Leaders of Change because I believe anyone working in e-commerce is a leader of change in an organization. But, I get together all my eComm managers from around the world into one place for 2 or 3 days. But invited to that event is the global social, is the global shopper marketing, the global digital marketing teams, the global category teams. And it's bringing those individuals into the community, but it's also creating that forum. And, it would be very easy to keep that closed, to only have eComm people in the room. And yes, you might sit there and think, okay, this is less relevant to me. But again, it's all kind of complementing that dissemination of knowledge, I would say, across the organisation.
And if you were advising an FMCG brand building its e-commerce strategy from scratch today, what would be the first 3 priorities you'd focus on?
So my first priority would be keep it simple. So my global strategy is 2 pages. The first is where to play, and the second is how to win. There's been some small tweaks over the past 5 years, but it's pretty much remained consistent, and that's enabled us to get to where we are today. And I think, again, it's to the point earlier, it helps you focus on the 2 to 5 things that are going to matter and almost help you kind of, I wouldn't say ignore, but take a pause on the 95 other things that you could be doing. Secondly, I would say getting really good content live that meets retailer algorithms, but also now LLM algorithms. I think that is really important. It's almost forgotten, but it's such a simple piece which helps guide shoppers through purchase consideration. And then my final one would be, don't forget about the importance of people, because I think an eComm strategy only works if the people working on it actually, feel empowered and they feel like it's something they can reach and achieve. So that would be my kind of 3 ways of looking at eComm strategy from scratch.
So just to dig deeper into one of your points, so how would you recommend maybe that brands balance e-commerce and retailer? I know it probably is different based on like different brands, budgets, etc., but just kind of like a ballpark guideline or percentage.
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, the natural thing to do would be to look at e-commerce as a sales percentage, which for us, we're still in single digits. But it's thinking about that influence piece. So again, we know somewhere between 60 to 80% of in-store purchases are influenced through some form of digital touch point. So for me, it's trying to think about the shopper, as we said, as being omni-channel, multi-touch points. They're not, I would say I find it hard to believe someone would just be exclusive to online shopping. We do know there are people who are exclusive to in-store, but quite often people are moving to be that, they use both touch points. And I would say there's sometimes a misconception that, eComm's stealing my sales and, they're taking away my traditional retail, but it's not the case, right? It's where the shopper's at, and we need to meet them at that moment and deliver the brand experience, as opposed to thinking about it as conflicting channels.
I think also to your last point around the whole thing of like, but they're stealing our sales, you kind of, I would say, also mentioned that earlier in the case of, don't forget that we're working together as a team, we're working towards the same goal. It's very easy to be like, these are our objectives for our team, but there is power in all of your teams working together collaboratively. Like, I know our best campaigns when we'd be on a call and we would have the eComm team, we'd have the shopper team, the social team, our social agency, and our influencer agency all working together. And like you said, some parts you might be like, that's not really relevant. But when you're then putting that campaign together, you know that we have worked together, gotten all of our like knowledge and our skill sets, and we're able to drive more impact basically as a whole on that. Now, quick fire questions. What is your favorite book or podcast that you'd recommend at the moment?
I'm really into personal development. So my favorite book at the minute is a book called How to Own the World. And it's a guide to having a global perspective, but also a guide to investments. And we're not talking here about investment with loads of money. It's even if you're starting out with £1, where's the best place to put that £1? And I feel really passionate that this type of financial education, it doesn't happen in school. It doesn't happen in many homes either. And I've really found a lot of value in this book, basically teaching me how to invest globally, which I'm finding really interesting.
And what's the best piece of advice that you think you've received?
In my first job, someone once told me, your worst day is only ever 24 hours long. And in challenging times, I always remind myself of that, because it's true, right? Each day is only 24 hours. And that's really helped me bring a lot of perspective into a challenging situation.
Well, thanks so much, Nicole, for joining us on Connected Thinking. It's been such a pleasure to have you. And yeah, it's super inspiring, such a great chat. And I hope that everyone listening has been able to take some of your nuggets of wisdom away.
Thank you so much.